leyendo de... Buenas noches, soy Lourdes Evans. Estamos leyendo de The Midnight Library de Matt Haig. Hoy el capítulo que se llama Walking in Circles. An hour later, and Nora was on an expanse on snow-covered rock. El ruido. More of a scary than an island. A place so small that a place so small and uninhabitable, it had no name, though a large island, ominously titled Bear Island, was visible across the ice-cold water. She stood next to a boat. Not the Lance, the large boat she'd had breakfast on, that was moored safely out at sea, but the small motor dinghy that had been dragged up out of the water almost single-handedly by a big boulder of a man called Rune, who, despite his Scandinavian name, spoke languid West Coast American. At her feet was a fluorescent yellow rucksack, and lying on the ground was the Winchester rifle that had been leaning against the wall in the cabin. This was her gun. In this life, she owned a firearm. Next to the gun was a saucepan with a ladle inside it. Le cerró la puerta. Le abrí el gato un segundo, pobrecito, que quería respirar. He worked at the hospital as a general surgeon, and she'd ended up asking him lots of questions about the sort of stuff he did. On that particular day, he'd removed an appendix and a bile duct. Nice. She also asked about normal post-surgery recovery time and procedure times, and he had been very reassuring. He'd ended up talking for a very long time about all sorts of things which he seemed to sense she'd been in need of. He'd said something about not over-Googling health symptoms, and that had led to them talking about social media. He believed that the more people were connected on social media, the lonelier society became. That's why everyone hates each other nowadays, she reckoned, because they are overloaded with non-friend friends. Ever heard about Dan Bird's number? And then he had told her about a man called Roger Dunbar at Oxford University who had discovered that human beings were wired to know only 150 people, and that was the average size of hunter-gathered communities. And the Doomsday Book, Ash had told her, under the stark lightning of the hospital canteen. If you look at I think it's Doomsday Book, the average size of an English community at that time was 150 people, except in Kent, where it was 100 people. I'm from Kent. We have antisocial DNA. I've been to Kent, Nora had countered. I noticed that. But I like that theory. I can meet that many people on Instagram in an hour. Exactly. Not healthy. Our brains can't handle it, which is why we crave face-to-face communication more than ever, and which is why I would never buy my Simon and Garfunkel guitar chord songbooks online. She smiled at the memory, then was brought back to the reality of the Arctic landscape by the sound of a loud splash. A few meters away from her, between the rocky skerry, she was standing on Bear Island. There was another little rock, or collection of rocks, sticking out of the water. Something was emerging from the sea froth. Something heavy, slapping against the stone with a great wet weight. her whole body shaking. She got ready to fire the flare, but it wasn't a polar bear. It was a walrus. The fat, brown, wrinkled beast shuffled over the ice, then stopped to stare at her. She, or he, looked old, even for a walrus. The walrus knew no shame and could hold a stare for an indefinite amount of time. Nora felt scared. She only knew two things about walruses: that they could be vicious and that they were never alone for very long. There were probably other walruses about to haul out of the water. She wondered if she should fire the flare. The walrus stayed where it was, like a ghost of itself, in the grainy light, but slowly disappeared behind a veil of fog. Minutes went by. Nora had 7 layers of clothing on, but her eyelids felt like they were stiffening and could freeze shut if she closed them for too long. She heard the voices of the others occasionally drift over to her, and for a while her colleagues returned close enough for her to see some of them. Silhouettes in the fog, hunched over the ground, reading eye samples with equipment she wouldn't have understood. But then they disappeared again. Fog. Qué hijo de puta. Ay, que mira, tenés que... She ate one of the protein bars in her rucksack. It was cold and hard as toffee. She checked her phone, but there was no signal. It was very quiet. The quiet made her realize how much noise there was elsewhere in the world. Here, noisy and had meaning. Here, noise had meaning. You heard something and you had to pay attention. And as she was chewing there, As she was chewing, there came another splashing sound, this time from a different direction. The combination of fog and weak light made it hard to see, but it wasn't a walrus. That became clear when she realized the silhouette moving towards her was bigger than a walrus and much bigger than any human. Seguimos un capítulo más. A moment of extreme crisis in the middle of nowhere. Oh fuck, whispered Nora into the cold. Ya está, fin del capítulo. Vamos a leer otro. The frustration of not finding a library when you really need one. The fog cleared to reveal a huge white bear standing upright. It dropped down to all fours and continued moving toward her with surprising velocity and a heavy and terrifying grace. Nora did nothing. Her mind was jammed with panic. She was as still as a permafrost she stood on. Fuck. Eventually, a survival impulse kicked in, and Nora raised the signal pistol and fired it, and the flare shot out like a tiny comet and disappeared into the water, the glow fading along with her hope. The creature was still coming towards her. She fell to her knees and started clanging the ladle against the saucepan and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Bear, bear, bear!" The bear stopped momentarily. "Bear, bear, bear!" It was now walking forward again. The banging wasn't working. The bear was close. She wondered if she could reach the rifle lying on the ice, just slightly too far away. She could see the bear's vast pawed feet, armed with claws, pressing into the snow-dusted rock. Its head was low, and its black eyes were looking directly at her. "Library!" Nora screamed. "Mrs. Elm, please, send me back. This is the wrong life. It is really, really, really wrong. Take me back. I don't want adventure. Where's the library? I want the library." "No, pelotuda, jodete, cagate muriendo." There was no hatred in the polar bear's stare. Nora just was just food. meat, and that was a humbling kind of terror. Her heart pounded like a drummer, reaching the crescendo, the end of a song, and it became astoundingly clear to her finally in that moment. She didn't want to die, and that was the problem. In the face of death, life seemed more attractive, and as life seemed more attractive, how could she get back to the Midnight Library? She had to be disappointed in a life, not just scared of it, in order to try again with another book. There was death. Por fin! Violent, oblivious death, in bare form, staring at her with its black eyes. And she knew then, more than she'd known anything, that she wasn't ready to die. This knowledge grew bigger than fear itself, and she stood there face to face with a polar bear, itself hungry and desperate to exist, and banged the ladle against the saucepan, harder. A fast staccato bang, bang, bang. I'm not scared, I'm not scared, I'm not scared. Blah, blah. Dice como 80 veces. The bear stood and stared the way the walrus had. She glanced at the rifle. Yes, it was too far away. By the time she could grab it and work out how to fire it, it would already be too late. She doubted she'd be able to kill a polar bear anyway. So she banged the ladle. Nora closed her eyes, wishing for the library as she carried on, making noise. When she opened them, the bear was slipping headfirst into the water. She kept banging the saucepan, even after a creature had disappeared. About a minute later, she heard the humans calling her name through the fog. Puta, no se murió, yo quería que se muriera. Seguiremos la próxima.